Associate today, and we have welcoming words about, how we're an inclusive church and such. And I'm sorry, I don't have a good. Nope, that comes later. I'm sorry, I'm looking at my script feeling like that should come first, but let me welcome you in a few minutes first. Let's light our chalice, and I'm inviting Pete to come up and do that, please. We light this chalice for the warmth of love, for the light of truth, and for the energy of action. Thanks, Pete. Sorry, here's your official welcome. Good morning. The UU Church is a welcoming, inclusive place where diversity of thought is encouraged, sought, and appreciated. It doesn't matter who you love or how you identify yourself. We come here because we want to think for ourselves, explore with others. We ask questions, value the exchange of ideas, and the depth that can come from being in community. Newcomers, we encourage you to fill out a newcomer card in the pews and put it in the offering basket when it comes by later. And please stay and chat with us after the service. If you're joining us online, please fill out the newcomer card online. I think it was on top of a surge protector and it just went down. Okay, sorry. If you haven't already, please put your phones on silent. We're glad each and every one of you are here, and we welcome you, and we hope you enjoy our service today. Well, our main topic for this week's service is Father's Day. The Juneteenth holiday is also this Wednesday. Juneteenth is a holiday that celebrates the ending of legal slavery in the United States, and our reading this morning is on this topic. Tim just told me too, I'd like to add that there is a celebration that's been going on downtown Ogden at the amphitheater this weekend, and it's still going on today, if you want to participate in that. So for a reading, I did a little research and I found a write-up for congressmen that just happened a couple days ago with some history and background into the Juneteenth. And I think most people know what it is, but I was curious, like, how long has it been a thing and where and when and how? So this is what I summarized from that. Wednesday, June 19th will mark the third year that the federal government and at least 28 states and the District of Columbia have observed Juneteenth as a paid in or legal holiday. It's just the third year. Most people know that June 19th, 1865 marks the date that Major General Gordon Granger arrived in Galveston, Texas, and announced at the end of the Civil War and the end of slavery. Despite the fact that slavery had been officially ended via the Emancipation Proclamation 2.5 years earlier, people were still being held as slaves. The next year, in 1866, Texans held the first Juneteenth celebration, and the holiday spread with families who carried it with them out of Texas. 114 years later, in 1980, Texas was the first state to make Juneteenth an official holiday. The first federal attempt to create an official holiday began in 1994 with the first congressional resolution introduced to Congress in 1997. From that point, resolutions were introduced repeatedly in the House of Representatives and the Senate until the 116th Congress produced H.R. 7232 and the Senate produced SB 4019 in 2020. But neither bill was considered for vote. It took another year and the 117th Congress to finally vote by unanimous consent, and the Senate by a vote, sorry, I got it backwards. The Senate by unanimous consent and the Congress by a vote of 415 to 14, or sorry, the House of Representatives, to make June 19th a federal holiday. Anyway, almost completely unanimous. Utah, if you're curious, Utah enacted Juneteenth as a permanent paid state and or legal holiday by state legislative action in 2022. So you're encouraged to break bread with friends and family this Wednesday in a spirit of celebration of full freedom of the citizens of the United States.
Sleep, my child. And this is in the gray hymnal number 409.
Today we're gonna have a few different people talk to you about Father's Day, and Dylan's gonna get us started.
Thank you, Holly, and thank you, everybody, for being here this morning. And happy Father's Day. Father's Day is a holiday that I think tends to take a back seat to Mother's Day. It tends to be a little bit forgotten relatively, so I'm very glad we're celebrating it here today. For Father's Day today, I'm going to read two short reflections on my fathers. They will bookend our Father's Day talks. The first is tragic, the second, hopeful. My last name, Zwick, is like most last names of the United States, patrilineal. I inherited it from my father, who inherited it from his father, and so on. In my case, as in many others, it's an adopted name. My grandfather, Martin, adopted my father, Patrick, when my father was 12. Zwick is also a Jewish name and carries with it a difficult history. The Zwicks came from a small town in what is now Ukraine, a shtetl, if you will. In the 18th century, this town became a major center of the Hasidic Jewish movement, particularly the dynasty of the Rabbi Menachem Nachum Tversky. Throughout the 19th century, this Jewish community grew and maintained a vibrant religious and cultural life. The 20th century was not so kind. Pogroms in October 1905 and March of April of 1919 robbed or killed many Jews at the instigation of the Russian nationalist Black Hundreds. My great-grandparents, as a result, fled and moved to Brooklyn. Life in New York City wasn't easy. The immigrant Zwicks worked hard at any jobs they could, mostly in garment factories, and scraped by enough to stay alive and support their children, including my grandfather, Martin, who was born in November of 1920, shortly after his parents arrived in the United States. But however hard their life here may have been, and however difficult it must have been to uproot from their community and move to the other side of the world, it was certainly the right move. The Jews who remained within the town faced occupation by both the Polish army and then the Red Army, death and starvation during Stalin's collectivization campaigns, and then things got really bad. In World War II, the Nazis occupied the town from August 1941 to November 1943. Very close to all remaining Jews were murdered in the Holocaust. My father told me about the first time he met his adopted father, a toughened man who had lived and worked through hardships most people today, fortunately, can't imagine. The old man showed my dad a few items from the extended family he left behind when he came to the US. Some small, sentimental reminders he was able to carry with him. After doing so, the old man broke down in tears and told my dad, "This is all that's left." Now, you may be wondering about the name of this unlucky town from which my ancestors originate. Well, its misfortune didn't end with the Nazi occupation, and over this past century, fate has seemed determined to destroy it. Unlike almost every other Eastern European Jewish shtetl, you've all probably actually heard of this one. Its name is Chernobyl. My brother, my daughter, and myself are the only ones who carry on the name of the Zwicks from Chernobyl. It's a name I treasure and am proud to have. I don't identify as Jewish, not because I wouldn't welcome it or because I'd be afraid to, but because were I to do so, I'd feel like an imposter. I wasn't raised Jewish. I'm not a believer. The name my father adopted, and furthermore, in Jewish tradition, membership is matrilineal, and my only claim would be my father's father. However, the history of the Zwicks is part of why I'm a Unitarian. I think about them when minority ethnic groups, Jewish or not, are under threat around the globe or in flight away from danger and seeking a better life. Doing what little I can to support them is how I try to honor the legacy that is carried in my name.
Thank you, Dylan. So this is called On My Dad Being a Dad and Things I've Learned. My dad who died 2 years ago, could be a no-nonsense kind of guy. He was at turns gregarious and friendly, strict and severe, funny and biting. We all have those sorts of contrasts, I think. We never had many heart-to-heart talks as I was growing up. I probably would have squirmed uncomfortably if he tried. Nonetheless, the communication opened up as we both got older, and I learned from him, much of it via osmosis, gradual and unconscious assimilation by being around him. In that way, example in osmosis, I think we learn a lot in life. And I think we all take lessons from our fathers, whether we want to or not, whether they're good lessons or not so good lessons. And for what it's worth, here are some of the things I learned. Keep up with home maintenance. Fix it yourself if you can. If you let things slide, soon you have a whole array of problems to deal with. Within reason, spend your money. Be smart with it, but don't be miserly. Don't be foolish with it, but be sure to enjoy the fruits of your labor. Also, save for a rainy day. Be patient, cut people slack. I learned that seeing how impatient and irate he could get at times at seemingly inconsequential things. Stand up for yourself. This I say mainly from seeing him dealing with businesses and corporations who he thinks had gypped him in dealings and transactions. Also, though, I think be willing to cut people some slack. Know your limits. This I say from seeing him pull himself from the family home where I grew up and where he and my mom lived for some 40 years. It got too much for him to maintain, and notwithstanding the initial protests of my mom, the move, it turns out, suited them. Get rid of clutter. Get rid of clutter, stuff, and things you don't need. There's a lot you don't need. As for my kids, and I'll try not to embarrass you guys, I try to impart things to them, wisdom. I try to have conversations with them that I might have rolled my eyes at if my dad had them with me. Maybe they listen, maybe they roll their eyes. I'm not always sure. Anyway, here are a few things I try to impart as a dad. Be organized, be present, show up to school, to practice, to meetings, to events. Go outside your comfort zone, try new things. Pay attention in math, English, science, music, and other classes. It will be important in ways you can't know. And when you're offered the opportunity for extra credit, take it. Easy points. Finally, keep your room clean and put your dirty socks in the laundry room. One final point, imparting advice isn't the monopoly of dads. They aren't the only people who give advice. Today is Father's Day, the focus of this service, but all sorts of relationships are important, and we should be learning from everyone around us, not just our dads or moms. Likewise, even if you're not a dad, you probably have some pretty significant things you've learned along the way. Share with others and let others learn from you. Thank you.
I'm going to relate a little something funny first. If you have an Apple Watch, you know how sometimes it tells you to stand up so you can get more exercise? Well, my granddaughter attends the Mormon church, and one Sunday she was sitting there, and it was the part where you're free to get up and go up and talk, and she wasn't even thinking about getting up and talking. And all of a sudden her watch said, "Stand up." She says, "Okay, I guess I'm being told to do something." And she did. She got up and spoke. But today I'm going to now tell you about my dad. My dad, Richard Austin Harris, was born January 27th, 1920. in Waterloo, Iowa. At the age of 22, he was drafted to fight in World War II. I was 3 months old at the time when he left. He didn't get out of the Army until I was 3 years old. In all the pictures of my first and second birthday, Dad is missing. I didn't know him when he came home. I wanted to know who that strange man was. I can't imagine how I made him feel. I was recently reminded of all this when I reread some letters that my dad had written to my mom and to me when he was gone. Every letter said he missed us and he couldn't wait to get home. He never wrote about what was going on and didn't complain at all about his situation. Years later, I would ask him about the war, and he wouldn't talk about it. The only thing he ever said to me was, "Look at the map of Italy. It looks like a boot. I walked from the tip of the toe to the top of the boot." That told me a great deal there. Dad was redrafted into the Korean War, and the only thing he ever said about that was how cold he was, leaning against a tree trying to sleep. Now back to the letters that he wrote to us. They are the only connection I have to how the young man, my dad, was and to what he was feeling through the years that he was away from us. I think until the day that he died, he tried to make up for that missed time. We were very close, and I miss him, not just today on Father's Day, but all the time. And I also know that I'm not the only child whose dad was gone. I'm one of the lucky ones. My dad came home.
Well, I decided to talk about a secret I have that has to do with dads. I mentally adopt dads. So my own father was a bit of a lost soul. After he and my mother divorced, he stuck around for a little while and then disappeared when I was 6 or 7. After a little while, he turned up in Alaska, a very far distance from where I live with my brother and my mother in Los Angeles. I saw my dad a couple of times after that when he came down to the lower 48 to see his family in Pennsylvania, but he had remarried in Alaska, and my brother and I seemed to be out of sight and out of mind. Although I had a stepfather for a few years, he already had several grown daughters, and my brother in sports interested him more. I looked to other men in my life as positive role models, like my 4th grade teacher, Mr. Rude, who used to tip our chairs back to startle us, and Mr. Gerobio, my 5th grade teacher, who would yell at our class and get all worked up, and then at other times use endearing names for me and set me up with special tasks, like painting the school blacktop with circles and lines for a special dance performance. I felt love and trust and faith from him. He, more than any, taught me that I had academic promise. He's one of the first people to really make me believe that. In junior high, I adopted my first dad, my friend Carol's dad, Morty. Carol and I went to school together, and we also did Girl Scouts together. Sometimes Morty would pick us up or drive us somewhere, and he always called me daughter. He was from New York. And I don't know if he knew how much I loved that, but I think he did. Sadly, he died before Carol and I finished high school. In college, I certainly had some mentors who felt dad-ish, and I had a couple of beloved great uncles in my life then. But it was after college, after marriage and my own family, that I saw how wonderful a father could be with my husband. Dean is a wonderful dad, a classic dad, who can fix anything, who's up to play, When the kids were little toddlers, he used to throw them on the bed and it would look terrifying and they would love every second of it. He seems to know so much. And I think our adult kids now, they know to bypass me for some issues and go straight to daddy. It's been wonderful to see his journey from absolute lover of babies who changed more diapers than I did, thank goodness, to proud and stunned father of a fiercely independent daughter who surprised us today with photographs of her getting married on the beach in Texas this morning. We thought she was eloping next week. Surprise. Dean has been a strong and consistent father, and that's what I never got to experience as a child. Because a girl always wants her daddy, I have to admit that I'm still adopting dads. Let me take a quick step back and tell you that my own father did re-enter my life after a 20+ year absence. He moved back to Pennsylvania and we visited him a couple of times. But then he remarried, became ill, and left me for the last time several years ago. Although he had connected with me again, it was tenuous, and more than anything, I felt sorry for him. He just didn't know how to be a father, and I know that everyone isn't cut out to fit that role. However, there are men out there being dads who probably don't even know it. So back to my secret. I've adopted a few dads here at the UUCO, but I haven't told them. So I'm going to reveal that today. They all have their own kids, and I'm not interested in taking up real estate in the nest. But on this special day, I think I need to let them know that I admire and appreciate them. And although they all have their own daughters, well, I can be their UUCO daughter. My first secret dad would be a young father for me, but I've always felt a warmth and kindness from him. John Hines is such a dad, isn't he? He's friendly, wise, and extremely giving. As a fellow educator, John shares a chosen profession with me, and I have found that there's something weird about teachers spawning teachers. Seriously, ask a teacher if anyone in their family is a teacher. Almost always the answer is yes. I was an outlier, however. Given how tough it is, it doesn't make sense, but I was a first-generation university student, so I don't have any predecessors, but the mutant gene did get passed to my son, Sam, who's going to go into teaching, so it's there. Maybe Mr. Root and Mr. DeRobio somehow worked a phantom gene into my brain, but John is my UUCO teacher dad, and I thank him for that. My second secret dad seems like he would drop anything to help out anyone who needed it. Brent Johnson always comes up for a hug and genuinely asks how I'm doing. And if you've had a hug from Brent, you know what I mean. You get a hug and then he pulls back and he looks at you and talks to you. He's the most amazing role model of a husband to Marilyn. That's something I never saw in my own family. And I know he's spent his retirement traveling all over to see his kids as much as possible. It's clear that he's a dad who really, really loves his family. So I like to pretend that I'm a UUCO daughter to him, and he is the sort of dad I might have wished for. My third and final dad is smart and funny and wise, and he reminds me of some of the best memories I have of my own father. And it's Brian Osborne. How is it that Brian and I have such a similar snarky sense of humor? I don't know, I love that. I can imagine Brian, like my own father, having traffic signal magic. That's something I remember about my dad. My dad would pull up to a stoplight, reach over and tickle my knee with a squeeze, and then snap his fingers and make the light turn green. I never understood how he did it. I could imagine Brian doing something like that with his own children. And Brian and I share a love of books and a thoughtfulness about books that no one else in my family ever had. I joined the book club when I joined the church in 2008, and my UUCO dad, Brian, was there, and now he and I are the OGs of the book club. So Brian, you and I are the stalwarts in our own families, the UUCO stalwarts who come to church, and you inspire me to stay involved, to speak my mind, and to feel compassion without letting the world get to me. So like it or not, you're one of my UUCO dads. I know people are sensitive about Mother's Day and Father's Day services, and I really get that. Biology and opportunity lead to children, but it takes so much more to be a parent. I think that people serve as mentors and role models to others all the time without ever realizing it. So I mentioned my 5th grade teacher, Mr. DeRobio. He never had children of his own. I need to describe him a little bit, and I don't know where to work this in, but he probably wasn't any taller than I am. He was a short-statured person, but lean and muscly in a tight sort of way. He always dressed real nice, and he was always chewing gum and rapidly. He was a proud Italian, Lou DeRobio, and he had a flash temper. So about 10 years after 5th grade, when I was in college, I learned that Lou DeRobio passed away, and he died of AIDS. I never knew he was gay, and it never mattered. But looking back, it explained the tight trousers, the button-down shirts with the gold chains, the perfect hair and mustache, and the 100-watt smile. This was the 70s, so he was the 70s little icon. I wish he knew how much I loved him. I really did. Sorry. And if I'd had any inkling that he was ill, I would have tried very hard to tell him. And that was his last lesson to me. Tell people who matter to you that they matter. So I used to think that I got a bad deal for a dad, but because of him, I learned to appreciate the good men around me, perhaps more than I would have otherwise. So happy Father's Day to dads everywhere.
Thank you so much, Holly, and thank you to everybody for speaking here today. Martin Zwick, a young Jewish man from Brooklyn, first-generation American, moved to Salt Lake City, Utah in 1949. Why? Because Maurice Abravanel, who'd barely just arrived in Salt Lake City himself, asked Martin to be the anchor of the woodwind section for a professional symphony Abravanel was trying to build in the heart of Mormon country. Martin, whose lifelong dream had been a permanent principal clarinet position, decided that if Abravanel, another Jew raised far away from Utah, believed he could live and work successfully in this peculiar land of Zion, then so could he. Martin was the principal clarinet of the Utah Symphony for 28 years, all of them with the Abravanel, and spanning almost the entirety of the maestro's career in Utah. My dad, you'll see here on the left and on the right, was also a symphony musician, and the two of them played together for over a decade. However, their relation to music was very different. For my dad, it was more of an intellectual passion. He loved music and was good at it, but he loved and was good at many other things as well. I could honestly easily imagine my dad having a successful career doing something else. Music was the path he chose, but it was not his only option. My grandfather didn't choose to become a musician. It's a calling that chose him. Music was an essential part of his soul, and I can't imagine him doing anything else. Anything else, and it wouldn't be him. He practiced at his terminal care facility. And a week before he died, he brought his mandolin into the lobby and played it for his fellow patients and the nurses. Music was his lifelong passion, but his hobby was photography. This worked out well. You see, the thing about playing any wind instrument in an orchestra is there can be a fair amount of downtime. You can just sit there in the back waiting for your cue for quite a while, particularly during practice, and particularly if there's a soloist. So, Martin would bring his camera to rehearsals and take pictures when he wasn't playing. He'd do this particularly when famous visiting soloists were there for a concerto. He said one time Jascha Heifetz saw him getting into position for a shot, and Heifetz turned to Abravanel and asked, "Is he your photographer?" Abravanel looked over and said, "Yeah, sometimes we also let him play the clarinet." The walls of my grandfather's study had maybe a dozen signed pictures he took of famous soloists, from Heifetz to Rubinstein. In 1989, a biography of Abravanel was published, and about 30 of the pictures in it were from my grandfather. One important, wonderful thing I learned from my grandfather is how fulfilling it can be in life to find your calling and pursue it with everything you've got because there's nothing else you could do. I'd like to share a story along these lines. After he was about 13, Martin started doing almost nothing else but play the clarinet. Music would have been a frivolous luxury to his parents when they were young, but they supported and encouraged him along this path because they wanted something better for their son and hoped maybe music could be his way up and out. My grandfather hoped this too. Now, they had almost no money, and sheet music wasn't cheap. So when he was in high school, multiple times per week, he'd go and visit the New York Public Library, ask to borrow some sheet music, and then copy it onto paper he'd acquired at his school. This was decades before Xerox, so it was all by hand, and it could be very tedious. Despite this, my grandfather said the act of copying by hand forced him to think deliberately about the structure of the music. After doing this for many years, he'd built up quite a sizable repertoire of his own handwritten pieces. A few months after graduating high school, he saw an advertisement for an audition for a youth symphony. Now, this wasn't going to be any youth symphony. The goal was to be the greatest youth symphony ever established, and its conductor was maybe the most famous conductor in the world at that time, Leopold Stokowski, fresh off his work on Disney's Fantasia. Auditions were being held throughout the country. This was the biggest opportunity my grandfather could imagine, and so he practiced as hard as he could. When the day of the audition came, Carnegie Hall, he brought not just his clarinet, but most of the handwritten sheet music he'd produced over the years. He didn't know why, but he wanted it to be there. He walked into the audition and was greeted by some official with a chair set up at the front of a long room. He looked in the back and he saw a few men listening from afar, including notably Stokowski. The man at the front led the audition and put my grandfather through his paces, scales, arpeggios, that sort of thing. and then asked my grandfather to pay the piece that he'd arranged or prepared, which he nailed. Finally, there was a sight reading section, and the man got out an untitled sheet of paper with some music. My grandfather looked it over and then told the man he recognized the piece and, in fact, had it with him in his collection. My grandpa asked if it would be okay to use his own transcription, and the man thanked him for his honesty, but said, no, performing a piece you know really isn't the point of sight reading. So he gave my grandpa another anonymous piece. Same story. They did this 6 times before the man said, well, I'm out of pieces for you to sight read. And he looked back at Stokowski and shrugged. Stokowski looked at him and shrugged back. And then turned to my grandfather and said, why don't you just play for us your favorite of the options? And sure, you can use your own transcription. My grandpa did, unsurprisingly nailed it, and then was done with his audition. He thanked the man who'd been talking to him, and then as he got up, he looked in the back of the room and saw Stokowski and said, thank you, Maestro. Stokowski was beaming and acknowledged it. My grandfather told me that audition was the first time being a professional musician felt real to him, not just a dream. As you might imagine, he won the audition and spent the next year traveling around the world with Stokowski on an exceptionally successful tour. The tour and the orchestra would have continued for another year were it not for the entry of the U.S. into World War II. The lesson in that story, the value of working very hard for very long for what you want to be, has been an inspiration my entire life. And just close, I want to play a brief excerpt from one of the recordings he did with the Utah Symphony. It's Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue.
My dad could whistle zippity doo-dah. We now invite you all to come forward to engage in our weekly ritual that helps us collectively hold the challenges and joys of being human. As you light a candle, sorry, I lost my place. As you light a candle, let it hold your hopes, memories, and gratitudes for this beautiful, complicated world and for our lives. And as you drop a stone in our sacred gathering waters, may it be an opportunity to imagine those burdens and quest for forgiveness held in community that will let the stone land with care and intention. Please come forward. We are so grateful to be in a community where we can share resources and live out our vision in the world. Our offering each Sunday is a testament to the value of this community and to our lived values. Now, please join me in calling for the offering. please rise and body your voice and facing the center aisle, sing together the offering song printed in your order of service. Thank you for giving. This offering helps the church, helps us in our effort to improve the world in big ways and small. Thank you. At this point, we have some announcements for you, and Dawn's gonna share those.
I think I'm sharing them. There we go. All right. Thank you all again. Next week is the UUA General Assembly. Debbie Hackett and Nitai Wilson will be attending as our delegates. And next Sunday, we'll be viewing a Sunday service put together for this year's GA. So we'll be meeting here at 10 a.m., our usual time and usual place, and we will have a bit of our own service sort of wrapped around it. But the main part will be a service that General Assembly is putting together for that Sunday that we'll be watching. We need volunteers for the Ogden Pride Festival. So we'll need several volunteers if we want to have a booth, and we do want to have a booth. Please contact Marianne at admin@uuco.org for more information, or if you think you're able to volunteer. Starting this week, we will offer listening sessions during coffee hour. So please join us at a table in the Geneva room for a loosely facilitated conversation about our vision and goals for our congregation. And then last but not least, the UUCO book club selection for this month is The Wager by David Grant. They'll be meeting this Wednesday, June 19th at 7 p.m. in the First Presbyterian Library. So if you'd like to join them for a discussion and you haven't started the book yet, you'd better get reading. But I can pretty much guarantee you that every one of the regular members has not finished it at this point. All right, I think we'll now have our closing hymn.
Two. So please rise in body or spirit and join us in singing Now Thank We All Our God. Again, that's Gray Hymnal number 32. I will play you the whole hymn as an introduction.
Yeah, I gotta work on that book. But I'm in the middle of AP scoring, so. I don't know. Come tell me about the wager. Just kidding. I started it. Okay. We're really glad that you came to our service. And as the service comes to an end, please join me in saying the chalice extinguishing words in your order of service. We extinguish this chalice.